It's a brand new week. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I am Nifemi Oguntoye. Our attention today is turned to Lagos, Africa's most populous city and arguably the continent's major financial center. Some would even say Lagos is one of the fastest growing cities in the world. Well, that depends on who's saying what and what data you're referring to. The question, however, this morning is how well is the state recovering economically from the pandemic, being the country's epicenter, and you also recall the monumental infrastructural and economic loss due to the violence we witnessed aftermath the Endsars protest. It's a new year, and there's a lot of talk about the new budget and the direction economically for Lagos State. Honorable Commissioner for Budget and Economic Planning is here with me in the studio, Mr. Sabi Gube. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Nifemi.
You know, we see you here every New Year for obvious reasons. Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year, Nifemi.
We have heard the economic team at the fact behind figure session, and we just need to make certain clarifications and help Lagosians better understand what these figures are. But let me ask you this. We saw a pandemic, and then we also saw the Endsars violence late last year. In your opinion, which one had more adverse effect economically on Lagos?
We'll say that they both had effects in different ways. You can talk about financial effects, but I think that the biggest effect were the effect it had on the minds of our people. And in therefore trying to steer the economy into course, right? It's important that we do not forget that the human capital, our people, do matter. And therefore, whether we are doing infrastructures or whatever we're doing, we must have fallouts that rub very heavily on our human capital development.
It was a rude shock, and you know, with time we'll talk about whether or not we have identified what really caused that violence, because some would say that wasn't the Endsars protest, and then others would say Lagos did not even deserve that, because we saw the governor himself joined the protest, met the president, you know, with the demands and all of that. But we'll talk about that in the course of the program. Let's begin with a review of the 2020 budget. It was revised downwards by 21% from 1.169 trillion to 920.5 billion. We were told that there was a 10% reduction in recurrent expenditure and 24% reduction in capital expenditure. But how much setback did that bring to the execution of projects in the outgone year?
Okay, so when your budget goes down by 240 billion, it will give you a setback of 240 billion. However, in terms of broad strategy, we've always known that the budget alone will not finance the infrastructure gap or the people requirement in Lagos. And therefore, there are other initiatives around our public-private partnership initiatives that then line up on top of that to save the day. So yes, it was a 240 billion setback. But like I always say, if you look at that setback just in the monetary term as I've defined it, we might lose the plot, right? It's about what it did to our people. It's about what the lockdown did to their production, to their productivity. The vision of Lagos is to be Africa's model megacity, right? It's supposed to be a global economic hub and financial hub that is safe, that is secure, that is functional, and that is productive. So when its functionality and its productivity is tempered with, right, as a result of lockdown and restrictions, what you see is that the mind of the people need to begin to transition into a new normal. And as government, we must lead the people, the private sector, the entrepreneurs and everybody in this particular direction. So that setback, right, is certainly more than 240 billion.
So when you say Lagos had achieved the revenue performance of 93% in the outgone year, what are you referring to? The revised figure, is it 93% of the revised targeted revenue?
Certainly.
And what figure is that precisely?
That is 812 billion.
Okay.
Became the new revenue expectation for Lagos State, and we did about 93% of that.
Where did most of that money come from?
A lot of that money also, interestingly, came out of our internally generated revenue. Also, we're extremely more conservative than what came out of federal transfer. Okay. Because when the heat came on crude oil prices, productivity everywhere will affect VAT. Production also was being affected because COVID did not just affect people's inability to produce or energy usage worldwide. It also means that people could not be on the platform and the oil rigs continuing to do their work. So you had a big challenge on the rate side and you had a big challenge on the production side.
Let's look at how that revenue fared compared to the previous budget, because you were quoted to have said last year that despite COVID, Lagos raked in more revenue in the first quarter than it did in 2019.
Well, Lagos is constantly growing, right? And when you talk about the first quarter, don't forget that the effect of COVID, you won't see a lot of it in the first quarter. And therefore, the performance of the first quarter actually outperformed our expectation. But generally speaking, we then haven't looked at where the economy was going, the amount of depression, the amount of decline that we're going to be seeing in our production. It was the reason why we reviewed downwards our expectation by 24%.
So we apparently didn't make as much money as we did in 2019.
No, we did 112 was the budget, and we did 93% of that.
Okay, I'm saying
so
that figure.
It's certainly more than what we would have done in 2019. Don't forget that irrespective of all that's happening, there's a general, you have inflation, prices of things are going up, and therefore some of the transaction taxes will also still go up. You didn't see a lot of its impact on VAT, because VAT will be affected on both sides, which cancels out, right? But clearly on things like pay, as people begin to drop their people, right, you begin to see that there might be some challenges in your PAYE income taxations.
As of December last year, you had recorded 77% performance in the capital expenditure. I'm talking about the third quarter of 2020. Mm-hmm. And then I think that brought a lot of excitement because you were eyeing a performance level of 90%. You were not able to achieve that, did you?
No, we didn't. But we got over 85%.
Okay. Which you consider a pass mark?
It's actually excellent. I think in any school you go, over 80% is an A alpha.
It's Lagos after all.
And this is Lagos, so we must lead at all times.
So the 2021 budget, what you have called the budget of rekindled hope, from 1.162 trillion, okay, that was the official figure for last year. We've seen 1.163 being the projected figure for 2021. We're looking at an upward review of about 100 billion from last year. Okay. Prior to the downward review.
Yeah.
How huge a significance is that?
It's actually very significant, right? And it speaks to the uniqueness of this budget. One of the things about this budget is that it actually shows, right, the amount of participation of the people of Lagos, because the budget didn't come from the sky. There was a lot of consultative fora, both by us, working with the senatorial district and the people, and even the House of Assembly, right? It speaks to the audacity of our aspiration, right? That we can dream despite the headwinds of the pandemic. We can get back and aspire for a 1.164 trillion budget. But beyond that, it also shows our determination, and it's the fact that we are going to deliver significantly more than what you will see in the budget, because we are going to be riding all kinds of bespoke financial structures, right, that will be much more than the budget, like what we are doing around our rail lines. You will not see the size of that expenditure because of the way it is structured on the budget. But it speaks to our heightened investments in our youth engagement, because you will see what we are doing with youth engagement in sports and in technology, right? It's our continued determination also not to leave anybody, any community behind. So what we started in our ward intervention will continue in terms of what we begin to do right, in the communities. But other things that this budget tends to say, it tends to demonstrate the teamwork in cabinet and the very fact that bespoke monitoring mechanisms for performance are still intact and are going to drive the performance of this budget. But beyond that, it speaks to a strong cabinet and a strong leadership of Mr. Governor, who will not cow down at the challenges of the pandemic and probably certainly lead us through in the fight to overcome these challenges.
Let's look at what this budget is driving at and what it seeks to achieve and highlight of the objectives. But particularly, I'm also concerned about how much buffer it has now, given the experience in 2020. We didn't see the pandemic coming, at least to the point, we did not envisage that by 2020, Lagos was going to be the epicenter and that our health infrastructure was going to be burdened. And then we also did not envisage the violence that rocked in the final part of the year. So I'm looking at the objectives of this new budget vis-a-vis the allowance for another shock in the new year.
Okay, so when you look at the budget, you know, we came into government, Mr. Governor announced the themes agenda. And when you find changes like this happening, you want to test the themes agenda to be sure that it still holds out. And what we see very clearly is that, yes, it still holds out. Certain aspects of it are going to be heightened, but the themes agenda still covered the grounds that we sought to cover from the beginning. So in terms of objective, the mission driving this budget, one of it is to aggressively develop, right, and maintain our infrastructure. You see it in the vision. It's mission critical to continue to drive infrastructure. But from all that has happened, it's also important that we begin to create employment. And we also have found out that employment itself, trying to create employment without getting the people employable, will just be chasing very dry winds, right? So it pursues a lot in the human capital development space. But we also see, like I said, in terms of the uniqueness of the budget, that in doing all of this at all time, you must keep the people participating. Because the intelligence of the class is not just the intelligence of the class captain, but the intelligence of the people in the class pulled together. And Lagos has a very high level knowledge base. I mean, we lead the country by far in terms of the cerebral capacity that is located in just this small geography, right? And therefore, we must be able to harness that intelligence together as government to deploy outcomes, right, that basically lead us closer to where we want to go to. But we feel also that as you deal with the youth, right, in sports and all that, technology has become a core of what we do. With social distancing, technology comes to the front. All the while, we had said to ourselves that we wanted to be the technology hub of Africa. Right? And therefore, if we are going to leverage and leapfrog in that manner, then we needed to put pay a lot of attention to technology. And so you will see that the budget to technology experienced a very big jump, about 238%, right? Because of all the things we seek to do. But we must improve our revenue collection mechanism, because all this expenditure without revenues only makes it a wish list, right? So we are developing simpler ways by which we'll get revenue going. And I talked about a public-private partnership, which
Just before you go on, talking about revenue, you had mentioned that a significant percentage of your projected IGR is expected to be contributed by LRRs.
Yep.
I'm concerned about the burden of taxation aftermath 2020. One would have thought that this year is a year where entrepreneurs are going to, get some relief from government, given what they've gone through. But 512 billion naira, it looks like Lagos will say have to pay for this budget this year.
Well, it is the government of Lagosians. It's not, the government does not come out of space. It is the people of Lagos who have sent us there that are giving the resource to back up their wishes and their determination to bring Lagos into a greater place. So it's not going to be an increased burden. We're not trying to tamper with the rate. We're just encouraging participation. So when we talk about participation, we're not just talking about voice participation or criticism participation, right, or verbal contribution, all of which are very important. But it's also to pay your commitments to your government, right, for your infrastructure and your people to be developed. So the idea is not to target increased taxation by way of increasing rate, is by way of increasing the volume that you collect because more people are participating and are committed to their Lagos.
Is there any form of exemption for businesses that were hardly hit by, for instance, the Endsars violence?
So we did quite a lot of things, not just the Endsars, even the pandemic destroyed quite or frustrated quite a bit of business, right? A lot of these are companies, and their relief really comes from their corporate income taxes, which are federal government taxes. But we have, through the Lagos State Employment Trust Fund, we are intervening, right, with giving out soft loans to get their working capital back to those who are qualifying. We also find out that it's important to also liaise very heavily. So you will see Mr. Governor engaging the presidency quite often, right? Because certain aspects of those relief are things that need to come from the presidency. But beyond that, it's to make the platform around which we engage and they engage us in a way that it is simple, right? It's much simplified and it's easy to operate. And sometimes you'll be shocked at the kind of outcome you get just by simplifying things.
Again, we see a relatively moderate recurrent expenditure, 60% of the total budget size earmarked for capital expenditure. As a matter of fact, that's an improvement on what we saw last year at 55 to 45 ratio. That's very impressive, relative to what the federal government is doing. Government has now promised to complete all ongoing projects captured last year, as well as others that were not started earlier. But let's talk about the major projects captured in this report, in this project. Particularly, I want us to begin with road projects because Lagosians are concerned about certain projects that have just tarried for too long. And they're wondering, what is the hope that things will get better in 2021?
Well, things will always get better all the time. When you look at our engagement in the transport sector, you see that it is significant. First of all, we triggered off the red line, right? And that red line project, right, is a significant one. There are very few, if any, subnational around the world that undertakes a rail project. We reached financial close late last year, and the project will be underway. When that project is complete, right, it will change the lives of people in using that whole line. It will move about 22.5 million people from Agbado all the way to Oyigbo. It's going to save travel time from about 2 hours to 45 minutes.
Is that the magic wand for the traffic in Lagos?
Well, it must be. You do not have a mega city without a thriving rail system. It's just that investing in rail is very significant. That particular rail line will have about 8 train stations. It will have 10 bridges, overpass bridges. And you know how expensive bridges are. It will have about 13 pedestrian walkways. And those train stations are places where people would like to gather, sit. It's going to be a concourse of some sort, right?
What's the lifespan of the project?
The project, we expect it to come on maybe early 2023 or late 2022.
All right, so what other projects, major road projects are we looking at?
So there are a lot. These projects are projects that span a lot of time. Okay. So you found out that we did quite a bit of renewal in the Koi Victoria Island axis, where we did over 24 kilometers worth of road, and it's still ongoing, right? You see roads like Thompson, you see those like Adeyemo and Lakija, right, all around there. Then if you go further, if you go to the K2 area, right, the Koshofe area, you see us doing things like the Demorin Road, and then quite a lot happening in the Korodu area, right? We're talking about roads like Igbogbo, Ijede, Agrikishawa Road that is going on. In the Agege side, you see us completing
the Agege Road. Will it be completed this year?
The Agege Pen Cinema, it will be completed this quarter.
This quarter?
Not just this year.
Wow, okay.
Right? And we see it. I mean, sitting from where I sit, driving, monitoring, and evaluation, we know for sure that it will be completed. I visited it, Mr. Governor has visited it, and we know that will happen. In the Alimosho area, we're undertaking roads like Ishuti, right, and other roads. So it's spread all over Lagos, right, in terms of road infrastructure. But the road is not all, right? You have to then begin to look at what we are doing in the schools, right? In the schools, almost 568 schools were, classrooms were delivered, right? And 1,568 bed hostels were delivered. We also supplied about furnishing to about 220,000 students. Beyond that, like I said, we are deploying technology, right? Because technology is the new way going forward. And we are putting devices to our EcoExcel program in the hands of 9,000 teachers, which we are training to aid standardization and proficiency and then the outcomes that we see. Right? So we're focusing quite heavily on that. And we have a program to then put devices in the hands of the student. We're targeting about 500,000 to 1 million devices, just working with the participation also of the private sector.
You talked about youth engagement earlier.
Yep. And
the need to employ more people. The entertainment industry is very key to Lagos. I don't know precisely how much money it's bringing in, but the branding alone is key for a city like Lagos. Is there any special intervention for them given what they went through last year?
Okay, certainly there's a provision with the LSTF focused on the creative entertainment, the hospitality sector. So that is that. But don't forget, again, sometimes we often forget it because it's not physical, that it doesn't matter how much resource you have, right? If your people are not ready to convert those resources into value, then it's challenging. I think the biggest Nigerian problem is a human capacity problem, because you have nations without oil and without solid minerals that are doing far better. So we have said to ourselves, when we talk about our mission being infrastructure development, right, it's not just infrastructure, but it's also people development, right? If the people are okay, and you see that we have push the envelope. This year, for example, our human capital development budget increased by 33% from 121 billion last year to 160 billion this year. And then we are looking at everything together. It is not just the formal, normal educations in primary, secondary, and the tertiary education. We're also looking very intensely at the vocational education. Okay. You need to look at your demography, for example, and say, okay, well, not everybody is the same. The level of poverty in the system is high, right? And therefore, vocational and technical education becomes a lot. For example, what we're doing with women in the Women Affairs Ministry and Poverty Alleviation, we've grown their budget by 93%. Right? In wealth creation, where you see a lot of vocational and skill-based training going on, we've grown that by 44%.
There's a lot to talk about. Let's turn to the health sector. I've received quite a huge financial boost last year. There was the talk about the 20 billion naira COVID-19 intervention fund. Well, we're going to leave it to public opinion to decide how Lagos fared, how we're managing, the pandemic. There's what the opposition is saying, but there's also the bias of majority of the people who have commended government in that regard. But I'm particularly concerned about what you have called the health insurance scheme, representing over 23% increased provision in that sector. Can you shed more light on that?
Okay, so when you talk about health, and I think when you have the opportunity to speak to the Commissioner for Health, he will throw a lot more light on that. But basically, health comes from two sides. You have the supply side and you have the demand side, right? And they both must work together. It doesn't matter how much hospitals you build. If the people can't pay for the service, then the hospitals will eventually die, actually, right? And it doesn't also matter, right, that the people must be able to access the healthcare on the supply side, but the health service also must be available. So we have pushed on two sides, right, to try and build the infrastructure, renovate the infrastructure, get it very fit for purpose. And we are doing that. So in 2020, we flagged off several projects which are continuing in 2021. We're trying to complete the furnishing and the equipping of the Mother and Child Care Hospital at Badagry. Badagry is completed. The one in Ekpe is almost 80% complete. We are renovating general hospitals in Isolo, in Ebutemeta, in Harvey Road, right? And those are on the supply side. But beyond that, we're also trying to do very iconic projects. What we call the new Massey Children's Hospital. When it is finished, it's going to be the largest in sub-Saharan Africa. Now, I'm talking of mother and child, I'm talking of children. So those are specialist hospitals, right? The idea is to make Lagos that place where you go to, right? But in terms of trying to respond, we are also committed, and we are building the Lagos State Infectious Disease Center. It will be one of its kind. We carry that responsibility that we must lead the country in every regard, right? And that will be happening also in Yaba.
Lagos has the highest infection burden from COVID-19 currently in Nigeria. There's a lot of talks about the vaccination program of the federal government. We're told that the priority for the federal government is the infection rate rather than the actual number of people who have been infected. So on the table, I think Lagos is next to Kano, for instance, in that regard. But is there a special provision for acquiring vaccines in this budget, or Lagos is relying on the federal government to make that happen?
If you heard the federal minister of finance talk, you will see that the federal government has not provided deliberately for vaccines. It's still unclear, right? The whole idea of the vaccines coming into the system came quite ahead or quite behind the budgeting process. So the truth is, yes, there are works going on to try and size the requirement and to try and size the mechanisms by which it will be funded, right? There are ways and means by which we could do it. I told you that we could work on a public-private partnership basis to get things funded. And all of those kind of conversations are going on. And certainly, we will come out with very definitive modus operandi when these do occur.
Sami Kube is the Commissioner for Budget and Economic Planning in Lagos. We're going to take a short break now. When we return, we'll open the phone lines, and you can also join this conversation via Twitter. It's at TVC News NG. Remember to tag me at Nifemi TVC so I can get all of your comments and your contribution. How much will Lagos be borrowing to fund this budget is part of the things we'll be talking about when we return. And thanks for staying with us. Commissioner for Budget and Economic Planning, Sami Kube, is my guest this morning. Thank you for staying the course on the program.
Thank you very much, Nifemi.
All right, so you're a member of the board of the Lagos Review Trust Fund. We believe the task is to rebuild and upgrade public infrastructure that were destroyed last year. But part of the board's responsibility is also getting detailed cost of restructuring and rebuilding of destroyed monuments. The governor at some point had made a rough estimate. I think I heard him say it would take close to 1 trillion naira to reinstate some of those things destroyed. Do we know precisely how much the infrastructure that were destroyed, really is?
Well, I think there's still a lot of work going on in that regard. When things get destroyed or get impacted on, there's a lot of integrity tests that must go on as to know whether you need to bring them all down or whether you can still work with those particular structure. It's our dream also not to just build back, but to build better. And therefore, there will be a lot of work going on in terms of assessment, and then design, right, in trying to establish the quantities. But beyond that, also the organization that the trust fund will be driving is an organization that is based very squarely on trust, the people's trust, basically.
Is there a time frame for the board's operation?
Well, in the first instance, it's 2 years.
Okay.
It may be renewed in terms of its life, but we are focused first on what we have that is certain.
Part of the board's priority would also be to advise state government on most critical assets to prioritize and identify emergency response service critically needed. So there is this beggar axis that I take every day, and the burnt BRT buses are there. Some say government kept it there to remind the people what happens when you burn government property. And then, unfortunately today you needed to see, the people is just by that property waiting for buses to take them to work. I'm wondering what have you decided on what your priority would be as regards which infrastructure to work on first in this regard?
Okay, so that is what is going on right now. There must be some quick wins and some progress. So, I mean, for example, when traffic lights are knocked down, you immediately feel it in the chaos that comes as a result. So things like traffic light are things that can be very quick wins that we can undertake. But, it's also important that you understand what the chaos did. And when you talk about assets, one of our biggest assets is our people. It's our people, and which is why you see when I say there's a heightened attention for youth engagement, reorientation of our people. These assets are ours, and we don't really need to leave them there to remind our people. When we find challenges in just moving from one place to the other because they are not there, we can feel it. And we don't need to teach our people a lesson by showing them.
The lesson has been learned.
It's for all of us. We all feel the pain. We all groan under the burden of what those things do represent. But we, like Mr. Governor had said, we will rebuild back, we will rebuild strong. We have a lot of people showing interest in committing to support the rebuild effort. Lagos State itself would make some commitments in terms of seed to that effort, which is in the budget. But I think it is to gather our people, is to gather the minds of our people to say, these are our assets, let's rebuild together.
So rebuilding for me is not even the biggest challenge. It is Lagos after all. I mean, Lagos has the money to rebuild. But we can't talk about true healing, truly healing the wounds of the crisis without first identifying the root cause. Because some would say, those guys were not the same guys who protested to Endsars. Do we know? So I have seen the Judicial Panel of Inquiry, looking into cases of abuse, by the Nigerian police. But do we know who unleashed this mayhem and for what purpose? Because we can rebuild, and God forbid it happens again.
Okay, so that panel is working, and the scope of the panel involves all of this, right? From our point of view, what we see is we see the outcomes. We see what has happened to us. Not only what has happened to us in terms of physical assets, we are seeing what is happening to us in terms of our people, right? And from those outcomes, right, we can begin to quickly direct resources and direct the mind share of our people. Don't forget, I always say, at the heart of the way this government runs is citizens' participation. They are our people, they are our mothers, they are our brothers, our sisters, right, that have been affected, right? And we are not disconnected from that, right? And that is why, if you notice from the beginning of the interview, I kept saying, it's the human capital, the people. How do we reorient them? How do we engage them, right? The budget for youth engagement, for example, alone for sports moved up by 58%.
I see
right?
that.
To just get people coming together again, interacting and doing things. But we also have a huge increase on the technology side, which is really a youth play.
Absolutely.
At the same time. Right?
I see that the Rebuild Lagos project is also captured in the 2021 budget. How much is allocated to this? But precisely, I'm also concerned about the fact that the governor mentioned that the government welcomes support from individuals and corporate organizations. Is there a system, through which all of these funds come in as support to Lagos at this time?
So that platform is the Rebuild Lagos Trust Fund, which allows everybody to participate. It is our Lagos, and so we must participate. And it's not just everybody participating, but the government will participate as well. That is the reason why the government has its provision in the budget to participate.
How much have you budgeted for it?
In the budget, it's about 15 billion that has been budgeted.
Let me hold you for a minute. Well, 15 million is a far cry from 1 trillion.
Yeah, but so it's not, when you look at the size of the people of Lagos and what Lagos can do. If you look at the GDP of Lagos and look at what the stakeholders of Lagos can do and those in the diaspora, then what you will say to yourself is that Lagos is capable.
Absolutely. Let's take George's call from Ikeja. Good morning, George.
Good morning, Nifemi.
Good morning.
Nifemi, I must commend Lagos State for this very ambitious budget. But I have two questions for the Honorable Commissioner. In the compensation effort of the Endsars tragedy, I want to ask the Commissioner, is there a budget to the repairs of TVC? TVC, I remember, is the largest private infrastructure that was destroyed during that crisis. I don't know whether...
George, can you come again? Which infrastructure are you referring to?
The GTB?
The TVC station.
Okay.
That was burnt down. So other casualties were mainly government establishments, government property. I want to know whether in their plan for compensating, whether TVC is also there. That's number one. The second question I have for him is about the Fourth Mainland Bridge. I heard that the Lagos State government is listing people that will be vying for that contract. Is the federal government going to co-fund it, or is going to be solely done by Lagos State government? I'm asking this question because the Fourth Mainland Bridge essentially should have been a federal government project, being a trunk A project. So I want to know whether Lagos State is going to single-handedly fund it, or federal government is going to be funding it in conjunction with Lagos State government. Thank you.
Thank you, George, for your contribution. You want to respond to that?
Okay, George, it would be nice to respond. Thank you for the question. While we were talking, we're talking about the destruction that happened, right? And it was not only government assets that were destroyed, but you had also a lot of private sector assets, and TVC is one of them. Now, I also did mention that rebuilding Lagos is not going to be an undertaking by the government alone, sitting alone. It was going to be a galvanizing of the contribution of every party put together. And we've had several meetings with TVC. We've tried to understand what their plans are, right? And whatever form of support that is reasonably required, we would do, right? So it's important that we understand that. So when you look at Lagos, right, what lifts Lagos up? Like when you see in the pandemic, you see government acting, you see the private sector acting. Then you see government working with the private sector acting, and all of that will be put to play. I understand, I know that an institution like TVC definitely has all kinds of recovery plans and will be open to supporting TVC as much as is possible. On the Fourth Mainland Bridge, the plan is not to have a contract as such, as in give out a contract. It's going to be a concession, a PPP arrangement. It's not an arrangement that will be done by the federal government. It's going to be driven very heavily by the private sector. And we had continued, we took out an expression of interest, and it has come down from about 30 down to about 6. And so there's a lot of impact assessment work going on right now. And we believe we will get the best-in-class partner to carry that bridge through.
Well, let's take Joshua's call. He's called in from neighboring Ogun. Good morning, Joshua.
Good morning to the Honorable Commissioner. Lagos State is well endowed. We all know about it. And Lagos is providing the example for the country. And I expect them to do certain things differently from the way other people do them. I am happy that the commissioner is emphasizing human capital development. This is so good. It touches me that he knows exactly what he's talking about and what the state is doing. Human capital development is going to solve a lot of problems, because I'm concerned that the rate at which infrastructures are being put in place, are we building human beings in that same manner? If we are not, those infrastructures will be destroyed by the people. So the human capital development is sacrosanct. If we are not moving in that direction, we're probably not just going anywhere. That's what is going to make me maybe address the issue of Endsars not repeating itself. Lagos State should put remedies in place, or should be proactive, that the state needs much more than just a little bit of security. There's a special program that should protect the infrastructure of the state. And finally, Lagos State, I want to appeal to that state. Lagos State, remember Ogun State. You see, no matter how big Lagos is, its neighbors would always amplify its success or failure. When you have poor neighbors surrounding you, they will drag you back. So Lagos should be deliberate about interfacing with Ogun State and driving the development together.
You are not suggesting that Ogun is poor, are you, Joshua?
Thanks.
All right, thank you very much for your contribution. I'm not sure he got that, but I'm sure that Ogun is not doing badly at all when it comes to revenue generation. But let us look at the attempt to finance these budgets. The government is saying it will raise 100 billion naira through domestic bond to fund the deficit in the 2021 budget. So a lot of people are talking about the debt burden on the state. We are looking forward to see the debt revenue ratio probably rise to about 22% in the new year. Okay, so I want us to talk about utilization and sustainability figures. What are we borrowing for? And how safe currently is our borrowing when you look at domestic and international standards?
Okay, you actually have thrown out all the figures, right? And I must thank you very much for that support. The truth is that it's not the size of the debt that is important. It's in how you service it. And it's how that debt service obligation puts pressure on your revenue sources. And what you've just said in terms of our sustainability is that it's moved from about 19% last year. When you add these borrowings, it then has come down to 22%. Now, that is still well within any standard for sustainability, which is somewhere between 30% and 40%. So Lagos is doing extremely well on the sustainability, and it's in the way we negotiate things. It's in the way Mr. Governor has significant experience in the finance industry. We have a very strong commissioner for finance. I have my background there as well. And we have a strong cabinet, right? One of the things we achieved last year was in renegotiating our loan book. And that renegotiation, what it did was to bring down the cost of those borrowings and even extend the tenor. What that means is that we're able to save about 12 billion, moving the interest rate from about 20 to about 12, and in some cases, single digits, right? That is phenomenal, right? And in moving forward, you see that we are positioning ourselves increasingly to have negotiated terms that are best in class, that are unmatchable in the country, and that present significant amount of value for the people of Lagos. Now, what will this debt be used for? If you see the size of the debt, it's 192 billion. What are we spending on capital expenditure? About 702 billion. So the capital expenditure will take on the entire the borrowing. Now, what does capital expenditure mean, right? Capital expenditure actually just means that we are putting infrastructure in place that will reduce, right, the cost of doing business in the environment. So when our people and our businesses do better, they earn more. And then Lagos State in turn then gets more revenue as a result of the prosperity.
Let me hold you very shortly. Yakub has called in from Dokemo. Yakub, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm there. Good morning.
Good morning.
And then good morning to you guys.
Good morning.
I don't have that in my mind. It is truly that the Lagos State government has a very good and vibrant cabinet. You know why? Why? Because the guys in the studio, he really know what he's talking about. You see, we people that voted for this government, we are the ones that are going to tell the government whether they are doing fine or not. I didn't think that he was telling us other side of the story this morning, as we have opportunity to call to this studio every time, as we always do. We'll be able to challenge him. But it is an opposite of that. I can tell you, in Dokemu here, there's some street that I've never thought in my mind that it will be done. If you come to Dokemu today, a lot of work is going on in the street. Because I wonder if there's no COVID, how this government is going to move fast. Because I give them that kudos, and then they should not be able to relate. And then another thing I would like Lagos State to invest on is technology. Because if there's technology, there's on security, because we don't want Endsars again. I don't think there's no COVID, there's no Endsars problem. I think Lagos State government, it could have gone more faster than this. And then about Ogun State, Mr. Joshua from Rewale, they say something. They should carry Ogun State along, because almost people, some people that are working here in Lagos, let's say 40% of them are living in Ogun State. And then there's some roads linked to Lagos State are very, very bad. They should be able to advise Ogun State. They should do the same thing that Lagos State is doing. Lagos State, they are always ahead of every state. Put those to you people, put those to the cabinet. You people should be not relent, and then God Almighty will help you. Thank you and good morning.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yakub, for your contribution. I see the Honorable Commissioner nodding his head in approval. Well, you're lucky that someone who likes you called.
Well, he's not calling from the air. He's calling from an environment where he can see things that we are doing. And I just like to thank him very much for those nice words, but also to assure him that we'll continue not to relent. I talked about technology. Our technology budget is grown by 298 from 8 billion to 32 billion. And the idea is to make Lagos that hub. In Africa. We are deploying a smart city initiative that will have about 2,000 intelligent cameras, facial recognition, number plate recognition. It will help us with security. It will help us also with a lot of traffic management. So we are going to be deploying a lot, even in the enforcement. Right? We are going to be using mobile handheld devices. We don't need any altercation with motorists. We just keep the evidence and make things happen. Right? Now, two of the speakers now have talked about our integration with neighboring communities. It is clear to us, right, that you can't succeed alone, right? And so, as a matter of fact, there's a lot of cooperation with Ogun State, with other states, with the Federation, and with our development partners.
Let me take our last caller because of time. Kayode Jinodio has called in from Surulere. Good morning, Kayode.
Good morning, Mr.
Good morning. You have a few seconds. I'm terrific. Please go ahead.
Yeah, please, I'll quickly rush it and talk to the Honorable Commissioner for Budget. My question is very simple, because I'm a member of Last Quota in Lagos State. Last Quota meaning Lagos State Council of Tradesmen and Artisans. And I understand that our governor is very much in support of this council. Officially, we were informed that some amount of money will be given to our members. And I'm representing the Video Film Producers Association of Nigeria in Lagos State branch. So my members are really they are really eager to get this money. We understand about 30,000.
All right, Mr. Kayode, let the commissioner respond to you very quickly, because we have to go now. I think he's wondering where's the money and how soon will it get to him.
I think what he's saying is that Mr. Governor has made a promise. Will it happen? If Mr. Governor says anything, it will happen. All right. So he should just be assured of the idea that whatever promise Mr. Governor has made, it will be met.
We have to leave it there. A big thank you to you. I'm hoping that you have time to come again in the course of the year and check with these figures. And hopefully the second wave is not going to take us back
If you
to where we
promise
were
to
in
be
2020.
this nice.
Oh, absolutely. I'm always nice on the show. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much.
Honorable Commissioner for Budget and Economic Planning, Sammy Gube. It's good to have you on the program always. That's our show today. I'll be back tomorrow, God willing. And we're counting down for Uncle Yeri to be back on the show, so get ready. He will soon return on this platform. See you again tomorrow. God bless now.